Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to the Undiscovered Games video podcast. This is the very first episode, so thank you for joining me here. If you came over from Instagram to check out the channel, thank you. Make sure you click subscribe over here as well. And if you're not familiar with my Instagram page, it's at undiscovered_games. And I post a lot of cool pictures and written reviews over there as well. I will continue to post my regular Instagram content as well as this brand new YouTube content where we focus on the lesser known board games of the world. That's what this whole channel is about. I wanted to create a channel where when you click subscribe, that every single update you see from our channel is going to be an undiscovered, lesser known board game. Maybe it's an older game, maybe it's a newer game that just didn't get the hype, whatever. It's not going to be the popular, trendy games. That's what this whole thing is about. It's a journey to discover the undiscovered, and we're going to do this together. And I'm just glad you're on this journey with me. So thank you for joining me, and make sure again you click subscribe. That really helps my channel grow and continue to make videos like this. You know, every year I think about the thousands of new board games that hit the market and just how many don't get popular. Think about there's only a handful really each year that make it to the top and get really popular. What happens to the rest of them? They just sort of go undiscovered. And, you know, some of my favorite games that I've ever played are ones that I had never heard about. I just took a chance because the box looked interesting or something like that. And it's like, it wasn't a popular game, but it ended up in my collection and getting played quite often. And that has happened to me a lot over the years. And that's what motivates me to keep wanting to seek out new games and games I've never heard about. A little bit about me. I started heavy into the hobby around 2012, 2013, around that time. So a little over 10 years ago, my wife and I got addicted to playing Dominion online. And we didn't even really realize it was a card game too. We played it online. Her brother showed it to us. And then once we found out there's a physical version of the game, we bought that and we started playing Dominion regularly. Then we learned about expansions, and we're like, what's an expansion? You know, so we started to seek out the Dominion expansions, and it got to a point where I didn't want to wait 2 days for shipping. So we would look up the local board game stores and see if anybody had any Dominion expansions in stock. We didn't even care what they were. We just wanted to expand our collection, and we were just so fascinated with that. Once we set foot in a board game store and we saw the rest of the games on the shelf, the rest was history. I mean, we were hooked on the hobby at that point. We started buying games left and right. I mean, we just had to try them all, you know? And so here we are, 10 years later, we have a collection around 500 games. And I think about the thousands that I have yet to play. I don't look backwards, I look forwards at all the rest that are sitting out there waiting to be found. So that's a little bit about my backstory. I wanted to start off my show by sharing my favorite board games because I wanted to put this into context for you as to what type of gamer I am. Now, this will probably be the only show where I focus on some games that you all know about because most of you probably know the games that are in my top 10 list. If you're at all into board games, you've probably heard of them all. But I just want to put this into context for you going forward. So when I do give recommendations, you can understand, you know, what type of board games I do like. Generally speaking, I love the old school Euro games with the wooden cubes and the beautiful like Renaissance artwork or maybe medieval castles and knights and things like that. Those are the types of themes and settings that I really prefer. I also like games that have more of a simple rule set but complex decisions. You know, I want the depth of my games to be in the decision making, not in trying to remember every little rule. You know, I want to be able to sit down, read the rule book, learn the game, and then really focus on playing the game, not focus on constantly reading the rule book. That's just kind of my preference in board gaming. Theme isn't as important as mechanisms. I like a good theme, but to me it's more about the setting and the artwork and the mechanisms. That comes first and foremost, and if you can implement a good theme into that, then I'm all about it. So that's just a little bit about me as a board gamer, kind of me in a nutshell. And let's take a look at my top 10 favorite games of all time, see if any of these are on your lists. Let me know in the comments if you like any of my top 10. And going forward in the future videos, we're going to dive into these lesser known games, but let's get this out of the way so you can kind of see what I'm all about and what my favorite games are as of right now. To start off my list of favorite board games of all time, number 10 is El Grande, the classic area control game designed by the great Wolfgang Kramer and Richard Ulrich. Hard to believe this game is from 1995. That means it's almost, wait for it, 30 years old almost. But what fascinates me more about this game is I didn't find out about this until 2015, which means this game sat unnoticed and undiscovered by me for 20 years. It existed and I had no idea the game even existed. Once I played it, I fell in love. I've played it a bunch since then, and it's firmly sitting in my top 10 right now. El Grande is an area control, area majority style game with this big, beautiful map. It looks like an old school, like hand-drawn, exploring map. And I just love the way the board looks. You get these wooden cubes to maneuver around the board. You're all just jockeying for position for the scoring rounds. You want to get in good position and get majorities of different areas for the scoring. And it's a very streamlined area control game, but it just does it perfectly. You bid for turn order, and then you get to draft cards from the table. The cards basically determine what you can do with your cubes. It's engaging from beginning to end. It just feels like a competition. From the moment you start that game to the very last turn, it feels like you and your opponents are just in this fierce competition. It's engaging, it's cutthroat. I love it. El Grande, check that one out if you've never played it. It's an absolute classic. By far my favorite area control game ever made. Okay, next up on my list at number 9 is 5 Tribes. This game came out in 2014 and it was released by Days of Wonder, who is known for their beautiful components, and this game is beautiful on the table. Designed by the great Bruno Cathala. 5 Tribes is a movement game, an area movement game where you use this Mancala style movement mechanism. You grab all the meeples from one square and you move adjacent and drop one meeple off as you move. Wherever you finish your movement, you get to collect all the meeples of one color and do their action. Each color does a different action. It's a very Euro style game because there's all these different ways to score points, but it's also a very tactical game. There's not a lot of long-term planning you can do because you have to react to the board. The board constantly changes each turn, and I love that puzzle. Every time it's your turn, there's a new puzzle to solve, yet you still have this point salad feel of like whatever you do is going to give you points, but you just have to figure out the way to do it the best and get the most points. So it's a Euro game with a very tactical approach. I love that mixture. The components are just beautiful. You put those palm trees and those castles out on the board. They're all wooden, and it just really pops when it's all on the table. So let's just keep it on moving here. Coming in at number 8 is a game we just talked about earlier, Dominion, and all of the Dominion expansions. I'm just gonna lump all the expansions in. I will say if you play Dominion, I highly recommend at least putting in a couple of the expansions. I've met some gamers who have played only the base game, and they're like, yeah, I like Dominion, it's okay, it's cool. But what really makes Dominion fun for me is it gives you a basic system of deck building, and then it says, here, go have fun with it. Mix and match all these different sets. Every time you play the game, it's going to be vastly different. And I love that excitement when you first set up a new game of Dominion and you're looking at this new setup of cards that you've never seen before, and you're just trying to think out your plan of action this time. Which combos might you be able to generate? Which cards might you get to work together nicely and things like that. So the endless replay value combined with the smooth gameplay, Dominion just does deck building so well. And, it is the original deck builder as far as I'm concerned. So check out Dominion if you've never played, and if you have played and you haven't tried the expansions, definitely add a few of those in. I think it'll improve drastically for you. Okay, we're gonna keep it moving to number 7 on my favorite games of all time. Number 7 is Tigris and Euphrates, from all the way back in 1997, designed by the great Dr. Reiner Knizia. one of the greatest game designers ever, in my opinion. He's designed so many great games, and I would argue Tigris and Euphrates is probably his most complex game. And if you're not familiar with Tigris and Euphrates, it's basically a tile placement game on a grid, and you're building out these kingdoms, and as the kingdoms get bigger, you're going to be generating points for yourself, but you're also going to be clashing with the other players because you have limited space on the board. So you're going to fight a lot of battles. There's external conflicts where kingdoms will run into each other. There's internal conflicts, which are basically like revolts within a kingdom. And it's a very mean game, but at the same time, it's so interesting to me because the strategies and the tactics are not immediately apparent. It doesn't spoon feed you how to do well in the game. What's also interesting is the end game scoring. You're controlling 4 different factions of a civilization, and you have to do well in all 4 factions because whatever you score the least in is going to be your score. So you could do well in 3 of the 4 factions, but if you only had like 1 point in the 4th faction, your score would be 1. So whatever you score the least in is your final score. So you really have to balance yourself out the whole game, and you have to pace yourself the whole game. Like many Knizia games, there's that pacing and timing element to the game. But honestly, the game really doesn't feel like a Knizia game. I've played a ton of his games, and Tigris and Euphrates feels very different from his other games, I would say. If you've never played it, check it out. It's kind of hard to find these days, but if you ever get a chance to play it, I would recommend trying it at least 3 times. It took me 3 times for the game to really click. But once it clicked, oh my gosh, I love this game. I just wish more people would give it a chance. All right, let's keep the list moving. Coming in strong at number 6 is Caelus. This came out in 2005, and I love me some Caelus. This is such a cool game. It's a worker placement game, and the progression is my favorite part. It builds and builds and builds, where you start the game with a pretty small board, a few options as to what you can do, but by the mid to late game, you're just racking your brain with the juicy choices that it gives you. It's got a great element of player interaction. You're building buildings on the board for other players to then use, but you'll get a bonus if they use it. And there's also a neat little mechanism for passing. If you want to opt out of the round, you can pass, and then the other players have to pay more money to stay in the round. So there's this little game of chicken going on, almost like daring each other to stay in the round and spend all their money. There's also a cool, the way the actions happen in the game is they go in order down the road. So as you're placing your workers, you have to also consider when the action will be triggered because it happens in an order. All these great decisions in this game. It's resource management, worker placement, and just that classic, like you need to do so much, but you can only do a little bit. Again, it's a thicker game. You're going to be straining your brain for 3 hours, but it feels so good. I love that type of game. Highly recommend. All right, moving on to number 5, Merlin. This was designed by Stefan Feld and Michael Renick, 2 excellent game designers. I love a lot of their games, but this game to me is excellent. It got mixed reviews, I will say. I don't know why people didn't like this. I think what it is, when you first play the game, it seems like you're just rolling dice and moving. It seems very limiting in that regard. But the more you play the game, the more you realize the entire point of the game is breaking your limitations of your dice. Your dice are going to limit what you can do. You have to invest in all these different things to be able to do more on your turn than your dice let you. So that's what the whole game's about. Visually, absolutely stunning game board with this beautiful, huge rondel that you just move your knights around. It's like the round table. And there's a great push and pull between the players regarding the area control. There's 2 different area control parts to the game. You have to spread out your influence, and you also have to build buildings out in the outer regions. There's also the Stefan Feld looming threat mechanism that he loves to use. You have to fight off these enemies like every other round, and you just have to balance all these different things. I love this game. The theme is great. It uses that Merlin, Knights of the Round Table, Camelot theme just beautifully. And there actually is some theme here. You know, a lot of the Feld games are not super thematic. This one has a little bit of theme to it, I have to give it that. But more importantly, the board and the production just look absolutely gorgeous. And most importantly, the gameplay is solid. I love this game. I don't know why it got such bad reviews, other than people didn't give it a chance to reveal its true nature. You know, if you play it, like I said, if you play it one time, you might think it's just like a roll and move and that's it. But the more you play it, the more subtle nuances start to show up. This was our most played game of 2022. We got the big box last Christmas, and we played this game so much that year, and we still play it a lot, but highly recommend checking this one out. Don't overlook Merlin. All right, we're gonna move on to number 4. Another game from 2017. That was a great year for board games, wasn't it? Wow, a lot of good games came out that year. Number 4 on my list is Rajas of the Ganges. This is a very popular game by Marcus and Inca Brand, and it's a worker placement game with a racing element to the game. And if you've never played this, basically you do a lot of different things that can either earn you money or fame or both. And you have a track going around the outside of the board that tracks your fame, and then you have another track going around the outside of the board that tracks your money, and they move in opposite directions. So the goal of the game is to intersect your tracks of fame and money. And if you're the first player to do that, you're pretty much going to win. Now, there are some end game conditions that might mean that you don't win the game by being the first player to do that, but that's essentially the goal of the game, is to cross those two tracks. And the game ramps up in speed. So starting out, it feels like it's just so hard to generate these fame and money points. And then, like, as the game builds, all of a sudden players start getting more and more combos, and they build up their engines a little bit to generate more and more fame and money, and you start to get nervous. Like, you think it's like early in the game, and all of a sudden somebody's about to cross their two tracks, and you're like, how did this happen? So it's kind of a tense game because it keeps you on edge the whole time. But I just love the way the board looks. In fact, I just thought of it now. This is the same artist as Merlin, my last game on my list. Dennis Lohausen. He's done some excellent artwork in games. So anyway, Rajas of the Ganges, I would not recommend it as much with 2 to 3 players, but with 4 players, this is easily in my top 10, and actually right now it's in my top 5 because I'm just really into this game. Check out Rajas of the Ganges if you missed that one. Okay, we are officially into the top 3 of my favorite board games of all time. Number 3 on my list is Raw. This is another game from the 90s. This is 1999 by, once again, Dr. Rainer Knizia. Raw is an auction game with a set collection scoring element. And if you've never played this, this is my favorite auction game ever made. I've played a ton of auction games because I like that mechanism, and Raw just beats them all. You have fixed bidding tokens, and the auctions are once around the table, and you can only spend those once per round. Once they're spent, they're used up, and you really have to decide when to pounce in this game. There is a wonderful angst between the players as you look at each other's bidding chips, you know, what you have left to bid with, and a lot of times you're just forcing an auction just to make other players make a tough decision. And I love that strategy in this game. Sometimes you actually have more power when you have lower bidding tokens, because you can just start auctions for like 1 or 2 tiles. And you know, the rest of the players like, oh, I can't let you have that for that cheap, but you only get those 3 bids per round. And there's also, you know, you have to worry about the round ending. There's a timer that happens with certain tiles that come out. And if you haven't bid by the time the round ends, then you're just out of luck. And the game is very simple. You either draw a tile or start an auction on your turn, that's it. And you know, if you draw a tile, it just increases the pool. And when an auction happens, you're gonna be, you know, bidding on more and more things. The tiles are simply a set collection scoring at the end of the game. That's probably the hardest part of the game, is just learning how each tile scores. But you know, you can go on the Board Game Geek website and download these reference sheets that really help visualize how the tiles score. Once you grasp that, the game is super easy. It's just one of those games that is full of tough decisions. Oh, I cannot let that person get that. I'm going to outbid them even though I really don't want that stuff. And there's just so many great moments like that in this game. So Raw, if you've never played it, it is, in my opinion, the best auction game, and it's going to be hard to beat. All right, number 2, favorite game of all time. We're going back to Stefan Feld here with his game Trajan. This came out in 2011, and Trajan is a more complex game, but it's really quite simple to grasp once you see how it works. There are essentially 6 different games happening at once, but they all feel like they're all connected. It's amazing to me how these mechanisms all weave together. Essentially, the game is an action selection game that uses another Mancala style movement where you have these little bowls and you pick up all your cubes from one bowl and you drop them off in clockwise order. Wherever you end up, that's the action you get to take. There's also these little bonus tiles where if you can line up your colors just right, it'll trigger like a bonus action. This is a very point salad style game like most Stefan Feld games are. Everything you do is going to get you points, but there's definitely some clear-cut strategies to this game, and players who are good at it are going to win every time. So it's not like you can just do whatever you want to do. You definitely have to know what you're doing and have a strategy in place. There's a lot of different pathways in this game, but I just love the way they all mix together. And for as complex of a game as it is, it's so easy to remember the rules to this. This is one of the heaviest games that I never have to look at the rule book, if that makes sense. So Trajan, if you've never played that one, I would just say go try it out. It's a really cool game. It's a very thinky game, very, very deep, and lots of ways to generate big turns. Those waterfall moments where one thing triggers another thing and triggers another thing, and all of a sudden you're getting like 50 points in a turn or something crazy. So it has a lot of those moments in it, and just check out Trajan. It's such a good game. All right, we have arrived at number 1 on my list of favorite games of all time. So this is my favorite board game of all time. Number 1, Hansa Teutonica. I bet you didn't see that one coming, but that is my current all-time favorite, and it has been for about 2 years now. Hansa Teutonica came out in 2009, and this is a very boring looking game. It's a very drab game board, and it's just wooden cubes. But I love the mechanisms in this game. The theme is absolutely just completely absent. There is no theme to this game, so don't even try to find a theme. It's all about the mechanisms. You have this board, and it shows you how many actions you get to do on your turn and how much stuff you can get on your turn. And you're always trying to improve your board and get more cubes out onto the main map. You're getting in each other's way. There's strategies on how to block people and how to bump people off of certain spots. You can establish buildings out on the board and get paid when other people go there. You can also establish routes. There's all these different things that you can pursue in this game, but the game is all about keeping each other in check. You can't let somebody run away with a certain spot of the board. I prefer this game with 4. It does play well with 5 as well. I don't like it as much with less than 4, but every player is at a tug of war with each other, and you're constantly trying to figure out, what are they going for? What should I go for instead? They have me blocked off over there, so maybe I'll pursue a route over here instead. And there's all these different ways to get what you need to get. But what I love about this is it provides you with a very simple formula. It's just a map and some cubes, with a few simple rules, and this game just keeps me coming back for more. It's different every time we play, and it fascinates me how it can be so different, because you're essentially doing the same thing every game, but everybody takes a slightly different route and it branches off. It's entirely up to the players how the game progresses, and I just find that fascinating. Hansa Teutonica, my number 1 favorite game of all time as of February of 2023. And like I said, from here on out, I'm focusing on the lesser known board games, the hidden treasures that are sitting out there, and we're going to discover those as we go on this journey together. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you on the next one.